Last month I noticed that something was off with my boyfriend. He was being too nice recently, like cleaning up his dirty dishes and being attentive to my needs. I would have thought that this was a good thing if only I hadn't caught him waking up in the middle of the night and leaving the house. I tried waiting for him to come back, but I fell asleep after some time, and the next thing I knew, he was back in bed with me. That morning, it clicked on me like I found all the pieces to the puzzle. That's why he was acting so nice. And recently, I would admit that we haven't had sex in a while, and I thought he just wasn't in the mood. But now I know why. He was having an affair. I was furious and heartbroken, so I told my best friend, Natalie, all about it, and she was as heartbroken as me. She kept asking if I was sure about it. I mean, what other explanation could it be? He'll be gone the whole night, and he'll be back in the morning. So, what did he do? Buy some damn milk or something? I said to her that I have a plan. I'm gonna wake up before he gets back one night and catch him red-handed. My best friend just nodded and said that was a good idea. So that night, my boyfriend prepared a nice meal for me, something he hadn't really done before, and I was mildly surprised. He pretended not to know anything about his infidelity, so our conversation went normally. However, when we finally settled back in bed, I had fallen asleep almost instantly. My sleep was so good that I wasn't able to wake up at midnight. I was pretty disappointed with myself. How could I have slept through all my alarms? What's even more weird was that come the next following nights, the same thing kept happening to me. I couldn't dare wake myself up in the middle of the night. I also tried staying up all night, but at some point I would fall asleep. That is really unusual, since I have been a night shift employee before, and I didn't have this kind of trouble just suddenly falling asleep. Sometimes I couldn't even remember what happened the night before. My crazy brain thought maybe my boyfriend was drugging me, like putting something to make me sleep through the night. That's the only possible explanation I could think of. But then I asked myself, how did he know about the plan? My heart sank as I realized the answer to my question. Natalie, my best friend. I couldn't believe it. Why would she betray me? Is she my boyfriend's lover? At this point, I was intoxicated with anger. I skipped dinner and only drank water from the tap. I made sure none of my boyfriend's drugs would reach me. My boyfriend was even persistent that I should eat or at least drink some milk. To me, that was a confirmation that he was indeed drugging me. I was about to confront him about his infidelity right then and there. But I felt a blunt force hit me at the back of my head, and I was out cold. When I came to, I was tied up in bed, and my boyfriend was watching me at the corner of our bedroom. He was biting his lips, and he was as pale as a sheet. "What is this?" I asked him. His eyes lit up when he saw me awake. He then ran to our living room and called for someone. My heart sank as I saw who it was. It was Natalie. I yelled immediately after seeing her. "It was you. How fucking dare you?" I showered at her. Natalie asked me to calm down. "It's not what you think," she kept repeating. "I'm gonna kill you both when I get out of here." I kept trying to free myself, but to no avail. They used some of the thickest rope I'd ever seen. "Babe, please just listen to me," my boyfriend said. "I'm not cheating on you. And certainly, Natalie and I have no romantic relationship. I get out of bed every night because I need to stay safe." "Stay safe?" I asked. "Stay safe from what?" "From you," he answered quickly. "What?" I replied. "Jace, it's near 3. We should get out of here," Natalie whispered. My boyfriend then took out a paint bucket and painted my hands and legs with red paint. I squirmed and yelled as he did it in a hurry. All the while, I was thinking, who is this person? Is this really even my boyfriend? How could he do all this to me? As if he could hear my thoughts, he kissed my forehead and said, "You'll understand everything tomorrow, I promise." Before I could reply, he and Natalie ran away, and I was all alone in our bedroom. I kept screaming for help, but I knew it was pointless. My mind was racing as fast as my heartbeat. My lungs felt like it was shrinking as I was struggling for air. No, no, no. How could they do this to me? And why are they doing this? I kept trying to free myself, but I got exhausted, and at some point I lost consciousness. When I woke up, I was still in bed. But I noticed that the ropes from last night left a real mark on my skin. My wrist was burning like hell too. My boyfriend was gone, and I literally never saw him again after that night. I was upstairs in my room one night just playing video games, with the volume really loud, when I thought I heard noises coming from downstairs. I muted the TV and I listened closer. Nothing. I resumed playing the game for another hour, until I heard it again, only much louder this time. I was sure I heard it this time, and I was a little freaked out. To assure myself, I went downstairs to the basement, where I thought I heard the noise coming from. Soon as I opened the basement door, I was hit with a cold breeze. I went downstairs and saw that the window was wide open. I was 100% sure I had closed and locked all the windows in the house. I was ready to make a run for it when something stopped me. I turned around, and for the first time, I noticed the closet door was slightly cracked open. I stood there for what seemed like at least 5 minutes in front of that door, debating whether I should open it. I moved closer and I put my hand on the doorknob. All of a sudden, I heard a creepy crackle coming from inside the closet. I have never run faster up a flight of stairs before. I locked the door behind me and I called the cops, who had an unusually fast response time. They came in and searched the house, and not even 5 minutes into their search, I heard a gunshot from downstairs. A few minutes later, they came out with a deranged-looking man who was probably homeless. They put him in the back of the police car, and they told me when they had opened the closet door, the man was holding a gun and he shot at them, but missed. He luckily missed his shot, and the cops disarmed him and arrested him. The scariest part was how close I was to opening that door and likely being murdered. My girlfriend talks in her sleep. At first it was cute and hilarious to tell her what she said the next morning. It was really just harmless nonsense. Like the sky is folding, or we need to raise the ground. We talked the next day about if she remembered her dream, but she never did. Wish I knew what she meant by we need to raise the ground. So, some context. Our nightly routine is for us to start cuddling and then give up once it gets too hot. Then we're both on our sides usually, back to back. She would fall asleep before I do, and so I would hear the full range of her nightly musings. Honestly, at first, I was eager to hear what she said, because it was always funny to tell her and our friends what she would say while she was deep in REM sleep. But now I'm done. I prefer she not talk anymore. How am I going to sleep after what happened last night? Last night around 11 p.m. she was asleep, and I was still up just reading. Back to back. I hear her mumble something under her breath. Couldn't quite make out what she said, but I lean over from my book to peek at her face, and she is sleeping soundly. I return to my book and get back absorbed into its pages. At some point, I fall asleep. But next thing I know, I'm woken up by my girlfriend, talking at full volume. I open my eyes, and at some point in the night, both of us have turned to lay face to face. My girlfriend's eyes were wide open, and she was staring right at me, no more than 2 inches from my face. But her eyes were blank, like she was looking through me. These eyes, man, it's like she was straining to widen them as much as possible. Those are the eyes I fell in love with, and right now they are scaring the absolute piss out of me. My heart rate skyrockets and my body gets a surge full of adrenaline. I throw off the covers and jump out of the bed, looking at her, and her eyes follow me like a painting, but her body stays still. For 1 second, I decided that my book light was keeping her awake, and what she had said was, "Can you please turn that off?" now out of bed looking at her. She's not right. Her body hasn't moved, but her eyes start from looking at me to looking around the room. I dare to ask her, "Are you all right?" But no response. Those eyes were piercing through me as I spoke, though. They are now deadlocked, looking right into my eyes. Her breathing hasn't changed. She was definitely still sleep breathing for sure. That's when, while looking right at me, she says in a too deep of a voice, for her, let alone as a woman in general, "Come back to bed, dearie." My girlfriend has never called me dearie before. We have cute names for sure, but they range from pumpkin, baby, or to cupcake. Dearie sounds like something my grandmother would call me. I decide I'll get more information before I climb back into bed with a potentially possessed girlfriend. "Are you awake, sweetie?" No response. The eyes dart from me to the wall, to the door, and then to the ceiling. I'm about to nope out of the room when her wide-open eyes rolled to the back of her head. The white from those eyes stood out to me, even with the dim radiance of the booklight. No pupils in sight, as she insists. Of course I'm awake. Come back to bed. With a subtle tap of the fingers on the comforter. Looking at her fingers now, I'm starting to come around. She's never sleepwalked before. Surely she is awake now if she's moving her hands. But I'm looking at her fingers as though she is pretending to have control. They are all going in different directions. Like one finger was pointing straight down and the others to the side. Those hands are not my girlfriend's hands. They are simulating normal movement as best they can. That's when I say, "Hey, I'm going to get a drink of water, baby. I'll be right back. Can I get you anything?" Fully planning to run out of the house the moment I'm over the threshold. But my normally agreeable and sweet girlfriend decides I'm not allowed to leave. As serious as cancer, she says in that too deep horror voice, "Take one step out of that door and I will rip out your throat and shit down your neck." Shocked but understanding the importance of not letting this beast know I am in trouble, I replied, "As interesting as a proposition as that is, I think I'm going to." And thinking quickly, I grab my water bottle from the nightstand. This doesn't please my girlfriend, as she decides to start screaming and fingering her way towards me. It's a supernatural scream, so high-pitched and bird-like, I feel as though my neighbors 3 houses down were going to ask us if he heard that last night. As far as I can muster, I unscrew the lid and douse her in water. Like I knew what I was doing. Her eyes close. Her garbled appendages normalized, and she's now back asleep. I'm going to sleep on the couch for a while. Maybe forever. She'll understand when she's awake. My brother didn't leave his room for 3 days, and my parents wouldn't let me check on him. On the 3rd night Jacob didn't come out of his room, I got the courage to bring it up to my mom. "People don't sleep for this long," I said. She was cooking a casserole, the 6th one this week. We were running out of fridge trays for the leftovers, but she kept making more. I would watch her from the corner of the kitchen, her posture curved and her newly grayed hair hanging over the food. I walked over and tugged at her sleeve, but she didn't respond. She was slathering butter on the top crust. "Mom," I said, "did you hear me?" "He needs his strength," she said. "We can't be bothering him." Before I could say anything, Dad walked in. His eyes were red and swollen, but he was smiling, and he had 3 cans of Coke in his hands. "I'm starving," he said. I still have the taste of that horrible cafeteria food in my mouth. "You would think hospitals have good food for how much money they make," Mom said. "I know, right?" Dad said. He placed the Cokes on the counter. Mom didn't want us to go near Jacob's room, but I was getting worried. I peered out from the kitchen. His room hung at the end of the hallway like an abandoned lighthouse, the only sign of life being the New York Yankees poster taped to his door. Near the ground, there was a small sliver of space to see if he had turned on his lights. It was still dark, as it had been for the last 3 days. I turned back to Mom. "Shouldn't we check on him?" I asked. "I don't know why places like Wendy's or Burger King don't put up little shops in hospitals," Dad went on. "I mean, you have hundreds of people who are stuck there for days on end. That's consistent business." "It's all politics," Mom said. "They sign these big contracts that are impossible to break." Right, that makes sense, right. Dad was standing next to Mom now, his face inches from the casserole, and he took a long sniff. "Ah," he said, "smells great." "Do you want some of the leftovers while this finishes in the oven?" she asked. "I think we still have some from yesterday. Wasn't the spinach and ricotta one good?" "Very good, very, very good," he said. "I literally couldn't stop eating it." "Jacob's gonna devour these when he gets the appetite," Mom said. I turned back and took a step into the hallway. The distance between me and his room felt long and narrow, like a high wire. When I got away from the casserole smell, I hit a different smell. It reminded me of old Jim's socks. Even with Mom's array of candles and incense, I could still smell it. It cut through everything. The last time I saw Jacob was on the drive home from his treatment. His face was a pale green and his eyes kept rolling back. Mom said I had to keep talking to him to keep his focus. Told him about my friends from school and how they kept pranking the teacher by putting tacks on her chair. It wasn't true. I actually just saw it on a TV show once, but I was running out of material. It really didn't matter though. Jacob didn't even respond. All he did was cough. Pink drool spilling out onto his t-shirt. "Danny," Mom said, "why don't you heat up some of those leftovers? We're all craving that spinach and ricotta casserole." "I can't stop thinking about it," Dad said. "I was literally dreaming about it last night." I ignored them. I kept my focus on my brother's store. I didn't dream about the casserole like Dad. I kept having a different dream. My brother was running into my room and flicking my ear. It was a game we used to play. You would tiptoe up to each other's door and then wait for our moment. Then the attacker ran in and got 1 or 2 good flicks before retreating. In my dream, though, Jacob would run in and flick me, but I wouldn't move. I just stood there. He would flick and laugh, and then flick some more sometimes. Sometimes he would flick so hard my ear flew off. "Earth to Danny," Dad said, snapping his fingers in my face. He was standing in front of me, blocking my view of Jacob's door. "Do you mind heating up 4 portions of the casserole in case Jacob wants some? We're going to eat that before this next casserole, because we want to make sure Jacob's able to try it, because in my opinion, it was definitely one of your mom's best." I looked up at him and held my eye contact. I couldn't say what I was thinking, so I wanted Dad to feel it. Maybe if I stared long enough, my feelings would translate. But Dad only looked at me for a moment, and then walked away. In that brief connection, though, I saw something I didn't want to see. It was like staring down the tunnel of the world's steepest well. "Come on now," he said. He grabbed my shoulders and turned me around. His voice got heavier. "You're going to want to heat up each piece individually, because if you do all of them at once, then you won't get the heat through the pieces. You'll probably have a couple that are too hot and others that are too cold, and then Jacob won't get the full picture of how good these casseroles are." Dad let go of my shoulders and walked ahead of me, but I stayed in the hallway a moment longer. I turned to look at my brother's door one last time. I fantasized about walking up to it and going inside, but I was afraid Mom would yell at me. Besides, I never liked going in there. He had a puke bucket next to his bed, which always had pink splatters in it, and there were always clumps of hair on his pillows. Back before the last hospital visit, Mom would make me go in there and talk to him. But I always made up some excuse, like that I had a cold and I didn't want to get him more sick. But when I couldn't get out of it, I would stay in there for a few minutes and watch him try to breathe. I would tell him about some TV episode I saw, then run back to my room. I looked up. I thought I was walking back to the kitchen, but I was moving toward the door. I didn't want to, but I kept moving, like my limbs were controlled by a puppeteer. I put my hand on the doorknob, and I turned it. The gym sock smell filled my head like helium. Through the darkness, I could make out a sliver of my brother's face. The soft evening light fell on him, and his eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling. His arms were straight as rulers, and his fingers curled like a blooming rose. I walked to the side of his bed. Red spit fell off his lips. He looked like a frowning clown. I flicked his ear, and it was hard. I walked out and closed the door behind me. As I walked back, I seemed to forget what the inside of his room looks like. With the door closed, I wondered what he was doing. Jacob could be doing jumping jacks, or reading comic books, or plotting his next ear flick attack. When I walked into the kitchen, I heated up 4 plates of spinach and ricotta casserole. When they were done, I wrapped Jacob's plate in aluminum foil and put it in the oven to keep warm. Then Mom, Dad, and I sat in the dining room, and we ate in silence. I'm from Connecticut. I was in a long-distance relationship with a girl from Georgia, and I would often make road trips down to visit her. I don't really mind. I love road trips. I've driven across the United States and back all on my own. There's just something about traveling the highways of the U.S. by yourself that's just so freeing. To save money, I would sleep in my car. It's really not so bad. It's basically camping in like a metal tent. Kind of makes you feel like you're really roughing it, if you will. I just recline the seat back, keep the key in the ignition just in case, and I doze off. No, I don't put anything up to block the windows for privacy, but maybe I should have. The trip down south is a comfortable 2-day drive. My stop would usually be somewhere along the Virginia-North Carolina border. So, for my previous trip, that's exactly where I stopped that night. Rest stops were often less trafficked and thus quieter than truck stops. Normally I would have stopped at a Love's, but I was so tired that I settled for the first rest stop I saw. It was oddly vacant that night, with only a couple of lone cars sitting 4 alone under the amber street lamps. Most likely travelers with the same idea as myself. I pulled into a parking spot away from the others, under the shadow of a tree and far from the street lamps. I figured I would have more privacy there as opposed to being bathed in light. So I did my usual thing, locked my doors, opened a window, just a hair for ventilation, kept my key in, reclined the seat, and then just went to sleep. I was never interrupted on any of these car camping nights, so I never suspected anything on this one. But then a sharp tap woke me up. At first I thought I heard it in my dream. I opened my eyes a bit confused. Since I was leaned back, I was facing the ceiling and I couldn't see anything. I then heard another tap, like a tiny object hitting a hard surface. It came in with an irregular rhythm. Was it raining? Was water dripping onto my windshield? I'm under a tree, so maybe something fell from the branches. Maybe it was a squirrel or a bird, and maybe they dropped something. What if a squirrel was climbing around my car? Or what if it wasn't an animal at all? The thought occurred to me that it might very well be a person poking around outside. What did they want? Were the doors locked? Yes, and the keys were in the ignition. I can leave in an instant. So, still, I lay there completely still, pretending to be asleep, pretending I hadn't heard anything. Pretty much just hoping whoever it was that they would leave me alone. It was better to not find out. I was definitely too afraid to find out. It was better to stay here in blissful ignorance. But still, the tapping continued, and it was at this point I knew I had to do something. There was no way I was just going to stay there. I literally had to look. My heart was pounding. In that moment, it was deafeningly loud. Whoever was out there could probably hear it too. I decided I was going to look. I was going to raise my head up and see what was making that noise, so that's what I did. What met my eyes sent a drool through my entire body. Every muscle fiber locked up in pure shock at what I saw. The faint glow of the street lamps cast just enough light for me to make out what I was looking at. Right there in the windshield, staring directly at me, was a face. Someone I presumed to be a woman was lying on my hood, her face pressed right up against my windshield. Her face was completely still, locked in a permanent grin. I froze in an overwhelming terror. The eyes I stared into appeared to have rolled back, showing only the whites. Her nose was turned up, pressed painfully into the glass. The lips stretched wide, revealing horrid rotten teeth. Even in the darkness, I could tell her skin was sickly pale, contrasting her long, filthy black hair. Whoever this was, she was clearly not in her right mind. I don't know how long I sat there, too afraid to move. Finally, I got a grip on myself, and I shot my hand to the ignition. It turned over, making, in that instant, the most beautiful sound I ever heard. But for a split second, I was afraid I might be caught in a horror movie scenario, the one where the car won't crank as the killer approaches. But luckily the car turned on just fine, and I reversed as fast as I could, trying to not give this creeper time to try anything. In my panic, I remember activating the windshield wipers in a futile attempt to get her off. I thought, was I about to drive out of here with some wacko holding onto my hood? Thankfully, I didn't have to worry about that because as soon as I stopped, the woman leapt off, landing on all floors. Seeing my opportunity, I shifted into drive and I gunned it, right as I saw her reaching for the driver's side door. With my foot on the gas, I sped out of the parking lot. And behind me, I heard her let out a piercing shriek like that of an animal. I looked in my rear-view mirror, and for a split second, I thought I saw her chasing me, running on all fours, with her black hair swinging wildly around her. I couldn't get a good look, as I rounded a curve in the road leading out of the rest stop and merged with the highway. Once there, I picked up speed and drove through the night. I did not dare stop again until I saw the morning light. I'm a 32-year-old female, and this is something that happened to me only 2 nights ago. My husband Kevin and I were on the porch smoking a cigarette. It was about 9 o'clock at night. We live far out deep in the woods, right off of a stretch of highway that's between 2 interstate exits. We were looking up at the stars, enjoying the quiet atmosphere of the crickets, glad to have a temporary relief from all of the usual traffic noise. I heard something and I shushed my husband, even though he hadn't said anything. Was that screaming? Yes, it was a woman screaming like nothing I had ever heard before. It sounded like she was getting murdered. In between blood-chilling screams, she was screaming out, "Help me, help me." I looked at my husband, and we were both really freaked out. The more she screamed, the closer she was getting to the house. I could eventually see a figure running along the median of the highway, making their way closer to the part of the highway that was in front of our house. Our house was a good way back from our driveway, but not far enough that you can't see anything. If we could see her, that meant that she could see us. But we don't have any yard security lights. Stupid, I know. So we were in complete darkness. We could still see the highway perfectly fine due to the house across from us, who still had their Christmas lights up. I threw my cigarette in the yard, and I backed up to stand in the doorway of the house, pulling out my phone to call 911. She was still in the median of the road, screaming. If anyone else in the surrounding houses heard her, they pretended like they didn't. Kevin runs past me inside to get on his jacket and shoes. I told him not to go out there, but he ignores me and gets dressed anyway. As soon as he was out of sight, I saw a red car up the road, and it pulled over next to where the lady was at. With her in the middle, there was still a stretch of highway between the both of them. There was a man driving. I couldn't see what he looked like. I only heard his voice. He was yelling that he was going to kill her, and he was calling her a bitch. It looked like he was throwing stuff at her out of the window, maybe clothes. As soon as she sees him pull over, she starts running straight towards our yard. By that time, I was already on the phone with the police officers, but as I said, I live out in the woods, pretty far out of town and all that, so it would take them a bit to get there. I yell for my husband, and I tell my 9-year-old son to go into our room where the baby is and close the door. He can hear the whole thing, and he was pretty frightened. My husband runs out onto the porch and into the yard towards her. He asks if she's okay, and she says that she had gotten a ride home from this guy, and halfway down the road he started acting really creepy. He refused to let her out where she told him to, and he kept driving with her in the car. She looked behind her seat, pretending to look at a car behind them, and she saw a roll of duct tape. Fearing for her life, she jumped out of the moving car, and she just started running down the road, screaming for help. Kevin starts to lead her towards the house, and by now is on the phone, also with the police, having gathered more information that I wasn't able to give them when I called. They told him to stay on the line with them until an officer showed up. He lets her in the house, and her face looks horrible. She is red and bleeding in a couple of spots, road rash from where she had jumped out. She also said that he hit her before she was able to escape. She came in and we locked the doorknob, deadbolt, and chain. We stood together near their window, waiting for the police to show up. Kevin was giving updates and answering questions on the phone. No, they haven't gotten here yet. Yes, his car is still parked across the highway. It's a red sedan in front of our neighbor's house with lots of blue porch Christmas lights, he told them. I was trying not to lose my shit when there was a loud bang on our door. The man was yelling, "I know you're in there. I saw you running. The people in there can't protect you." I shouted through the door that he needed to leave our property and, if he was smart, to get in his car and drive off. I told him we were on the phone with the police, but the answer he gave was the worst one I could ever hear. He says, "Go ahead, call the police, I don't care. It won't be here in time." And then bang, bang, bang on the door, over and over. The woman was freaking out and crying, saying, "Help me, please help me," over and over again. I ran to the kitchen to get a large knife just in case. We had a huge solid iron door, but our windows were easily breakable. If he really wanted to get in badly enough, he certainly could. My husband just came out from our bedroom with this gun when a squad car pulled up in the yard, 2 more following behind it, and one across the street where his car was. He took off on foot running. They tended to the woman and got her home safely, and it turns out she lives across the highway from us, about 5 houses to the left. It had been 2 hours later and they still hadn't found the man. Somehow when he ran away, he actually escaped. There are a lot of places to hide in these woods. I just hope he hides far away from here and never comes back. I met Anthony when I was in the 2nd grade. We were assigned to the same table together and we instantly hit it off. We had so much in common with each other. We both loved Legos, drawing, video games, and the list could go on and on. We would hang out almost every day after school. He would come over and we would play video games for hours, and when we were done we would play Legos. As we got older, Anthony became like a protector for me. I was a skinny kid who would get picked on all the time by the older kids, but Anthony would always come to my rescue and scare them off with his size. Anthony was a huge kid. By the time we got to middle school, he was 6'4" and weighed over 200 pounds. No one would mess with him, and they knew he was my best friend, so they wouldn't dare mess with me either. Even though Anthony seemed intimidating, he really was a nice guy. He never liked how big he was because he always felt out of place around school and at home. Anthony's parents were not tall in the slightest. His mom was only 5'2" and his dad was 5'8". His mom was especially nice to me. She would always bake me cookies when I came over to their house, while Anthony's dad was a whole nother story. He kind of scared me. He may not have been super tall, but he made up with his size. He was a big guy with huge shoulders and big arms. He never talked to me much, but when he did, he always spoke in this low, rough voice that sounded like he had just woken up. One thing I picked up quickly on was that Anthony never ate meat. First time he came over for dinner, we had steak, and he refused to eat it. "I don't like meat. Can I just have the salad and potatoes?" he asked. I thought it was odd at first, but that was because I didn't know about vegetarians and vegans. When I went to his house though, his freezer had a bunch of meat, like chicken, turkey, pork, and etc. I asked him about it when we were playing on his computer in his room one day, and he was quiet at first, and then he said, "All that meat in the freezer is for my parents. They love it, unlike me." When we got older, I asked him if he was a vegetarian, and his answer was a bit odd. Yeah, something like that. What else could he be, I thought. My thoughts on this died out as we got older. When we got into high school, I started to notice things with Anthony change. He got into lots of fights and he was suspended from school often. The older kids picked on him a lot, and when he tried to fight back, they would gang up on him and beat him to a bloody pulp. He would frequently have black eyes when I came over, and I would always ask why he felt like he needed to fight. But he never gave an answer, though. He would always try to talk about something else if I asked. At this point, I was getting bullied a lot too, but unlike Anthony, I didn't care what they said. I would just ignore them, and they would eventually leave me alone. Another important detail I picked up on early was his basement. I went down there only once, and it just seemed off. It was huge for a basement. A big open area with only a couple of fridges, full of more meat and some ice. Most of the time the basement was locked, which seemed weird, but I didn't care for it after a while. One day, though, one of the guys who usually beat up and picked on Anthony disappeared from school. His name was Tommy, and he was kind of the ringleader to the group that would beat up Anthony regularly. At first, no one paid attention when he wasn't at school for a couple of days. And then the days turned to weeks, and the weeks turned to months. Missing posters of Tommy started to show up around the school, and rumors started to spread. People believed Anthony had something to do with the kidnapping, but I really didn't believe any of these rumors. I knew my best friend would never do anything like that. He's not like that as a person. I mean, he wouldn't, would he? I did start to have my doubts at some point, but when I asked Anthony, he swore on his mother's life he didn't do anything to him. Months and months went by with the police searching for Tommy, but they couldn't find him. And eventually, they gave up on the search. Everyone seemed to forget about Tommy, but I didn't. Anthony seemed to be in a better mood when they gave up the search. I started to grow suspicious. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I thought deep down that Anthony did something to him. I tried talking to Anthony about Tommy, but he would get pissed every time I did, accusing me of believing the rumors at school and asking me how I couldn't believe his best friend. I stopped asking shortly after that, and I just forgot about Tommy altogether for a while. As time went on, high school got better for me and Anthony. Anthony started to play football, and he became really good at playing linebacker. He even started to get a couple scholarship offers from some big colleges. I didn't do any sports, but I met a wonderful girl named Vanessa, who would eventually become my wife. Vanessa was wonderful. She was an average girl, with long red hair and bright blue eyes, but she was perfect for me. We both loved books, writing, and movies. I would come over a lot, and we would cuddle as we watched a romantic movie. Romance was our favorite genre in writing and movies. The only problem was that Vanessa did not like Anthony at all. When we were at her house one night in her room, I asked why she didn't like Anthony, and she said, "He's creepy, Josh. Plus, didn't he do something to a kid like a year ago at our school?" "He didn't do anything. He isn't like that. Sure, he may have been beaten up by him possibly, but he wouldn't kidnap him or kill him. That's not who he is," I said. "How do you know that, though, Josh?" "He may have promised you he didn't do anything, but anyone can lie when they're desperate." I thought about that for a moment. He did swear on his mother's life that it was more than a promise, though. I had changed the subject after that, which Vanessa appreciated. After we watched a movie in her living room, halfway through the movie, I looked at my watch, which read 9:34 p.m. Shit, Mom said to be back by 9:30. I got up from Vanessa's couch and kissed her goodbye, and I told her that we'll finish the movie later. She kissed her hand and blew it at me, saying, "Okay, love you." I ran out as I looked down at my phone to see my mom calling. "Where are you? It's 9:34, and I told you to be back by 9:30. Sorry, Mom, I just lost track of time, I said. My mom wasn't one of those strict parents who got on kids who weren't home right on the dot. So she said, okay, honey, drive safe, and I'll see you at home soon. I love you. And I said, I love you too, of course. As I drove home, Vanessa's words were echoing in my mind. He may have promised you. Maybe she's right. Maybe he did lie to me. But no, this is Anthony we're talking about, your best friend since second grade. The memory of what Anthony said to me when I asked about Tommy came out of nowhere. Bro, why couldn't you just trust your best friend? I'm not lying to you. I didn't do shit to Tommy. I swear, dude. On my mom's life, you have to believe me. Who should I trust? My girlfriend or my best friend? I started to get a headache thinking about this as I pulled into my driveway. I unlocked my front door and I saw my mom sitting on the counter drinking some water. And she looked up as I walked in and said, Hey Josh, how was your time at Vanessa's? It was good. We started the third 50 Shades of Grey movie. We didn't finish it, but we probably will tomorrow, I said. Oh, how fun, she said as she hugged me. My parents were divorced and I live with my mom. They didn't divorce because of cheating or anything bad. They just decided they were better off as friends. I would go over to my dad's place about 3 times a week usually. He lives pretty close to where we live, so going back and forth from my parents' house was pretty easy. Are you hungry? My mom asked. No, I'm good. But, hey Mom, I asked. Yes, sweetie? I've never asked in a while, but what do you think about Anthony? She looked at me, then thought for a moment before saying, Well, I think he's a good kid. He's been your best friend for a long time, and he's been almost like your personal bodyguard, she said with a laugh. I laughed as well, and then I said, Yeah, I was just wondering, because you remember that kid that went missing about a year ago at our school? Of course. How could I forget? I was getting so many messages about it from my friends, she said. Well, remember how I also told you the kid who went missing was bullying Anthony? I asked. Yes, what are you getting at, Josh? She said. Do you think Anthony did anything to him or did something with him? Like, honestly. My mom was quiet now. She looked down at the floor, then up at me as she said, I really don't think Anthony would do something like that. Why do you think he would? She asked. I mean, I don't know. It's just when the police were searching and the kids were making rumors, he was so nervous. He quivered when he spoke, and he could never look me in the eye. And the police finally gave up on their search. He just went back to normal again, I said. Well, maybe he was nervous that the police would hear the rumors and that they would ask him questions and maybe arrest him. There are a lot of reasons to be nervous, Josh. The police especially make people nervous. I thought about this for a moment. Maybe she's right. Maybe Anthony was just scared that the police might arrest him. That's reasonable. Okay, thanks for listening, Mom, I said, heading up to bed. The next day at school, I texted Anthony and asked if he wanted to meet up at lunch. He agreed, and after sitting down, we talked about football, school, girls, and all the normal stuff. Felt like old times again, and I didn't realize how much I actually missed really talking with him. Hey bro, I've really missed hanging out with you. It feels like we never do anymore, he said. Yeah, I know. We should definitely hang out sometime, I said. How about tonight, if you don't have anything to do, he said. Yeah, I'd love to, dude. The bell rang, and before we took off to our classes, he said as he gave me a fist bump, Sick man, come over to my house around 4. Town's awesome, I'll see you then, I said, waving before heading off to my next class. I met up with Vanessa after school as I usually did to walk her home. On the walk, she asked if I wanted to come over tonight to finish the movie. Sorry babe, not tonight, I'm hanging out with Anthony, I said. She looked at me with an annoyed and worried expression on her face. She said, You know, I don't like you hanging out with him. He could be dangerous, and I just don't get a good vibe from him. I started to get a little annoyed as I said, You have to understand, he's my best friend. I know deep down he's a good person. He's protected me my whole life, and he's always been by my side. I'm not going to stop hanging out with him just because of some stupid rumors that were made up about him almost a year ago. She was quiet the rest of the walk, and she didn't even say goodbye or I love you at her house. She just walked inside and slammed the door behind her. I sighed as I started to head home. I looked at the time on my phone, which read 3:34 p.m. I thought I might as well head to Anthony's now. Anthony only lived a couple minutes away from me on the other street, so I walked back to my house and I ate something quickly before I told my mom I was heading over to Anthony. Okay, buddy, have fun. Be back by 9:30 this time, okay? She said. Yes, Mom, I promise I won't forget, I said, giving her a hug before I left. After a couple of minutes of walking, I turned to Anthony's street and I saw his house. It was the first house on the street, a simple brown 2-story house with small windows at the top and bottom of the house. I walked up to the door and I checked my phone before ringing the doorbell. It was 3:48, a little early, but I'm sure he won't mind. I rang the doorbell, and not even a minute later, Anthony opened the door, smiling. Hey man, come inside, he said. I walked in, and the house looked the same as it always had. It was the same red couch in our living room, same brown dinner table, same big portrait of Anthony's family. Everything was the same. I saw Anthony's mom, who came and gave me a hug and said, Feels like it's been a while, Josh. How have you been? I've been good, Miss Johnson, I said. Right around then, I saw Anthony's dad watching football on the couch, and as he saw me, he gave me a single nod. I nodded back to him as me and Anthony ran upstairs. We went into his room, which had been redecorated a bit since the last time I saw it. There were a bunch of football posters of players and teams now hanging around his wall. He told me as I looked around at his posters that his favorite team was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And as I kept looking, I noticed there were lots of Buccaneer players wearing their red and black jerseys. We decided to fire up the PlayStation and play some Madden since that was his favorite game. I didn't really care for it that much, but Anthony was having a blast, so I kept playing for him. We played for a good hour before we decided to switch to Call of Duty. We played for hours, just talking and laughing as we talked about old memories, but we eventually got quiet because we started to get competitive as we kept playing. After a while, I checked the time, which read 9:00 p.m. Dang, almost time to go, man. After the last game, I got thirsty and I told Anthony I was going to head down and get a drink of water. He didn't even look up as he was locked into the new game that you just started without me. Okay, be quick, I want to destroy you again like I did in the last match, he said. You wish, I said with a chuckle as I headed downstairs. I walked down the stairs fast but quiet since Anthony's parents were in bed now. Once downstairs, I located the cabinet with the cups in the dark and I grabbed some water from the fridge. As I was drinking the water, I started to notice something. Smell started to fill my nose that worsened quickly. It smelled nauseating and sweet, like burning leather almost. When the smell worsened, I picked up something with the smell. It smelled like something dead. When I was walking home a week ago, I saw a dead squirrel in the middle of the street, and as I passed it, it had a strong odor like the one I'm smelling now. I started to follow the smell now, curious as to what it was. I navigated through the dark, and once I located the smell, I froze in place. The smell was coming from the basement, and even in the dark, I could see the door was slightly open. I gulped, and I was standing there deciding whether I should go in or not. But curiosity ran through my mind as I descended down the stairs. I held up my phone as light as I plugged my nose walking down. The basement looked the same as usual, but as I got closer to the smell, it burned into my nose, even as I was keeping my nose closed shut. I could see there was a plastic container tucked away into the far corner near one of the fridges. I got closer and closer as the odor got stronger and stronger. Once I reached the container, I could see there was some kind of meat inside. I don't know why, but I opened the container and I gasped as I fell back in horror. There were 2 human fingers sitting on top of the meat, and between the meat, I could see an eye barely visible. I almost threw up at the sight of it, but I somehow managed to keep it in as I started to freak out. What the hell is this? A dead human? Who and why? Why would Anthony have done this? Then it hit me. I didn't want to believe it, but the thought crept in. Is this Tommy? You shouldn't be here, Josh, I heard from behind me. I spinned around to see Anthony standing there motionless. We stood there staring at each other. Anthony didn't look angry or sad. He just had this blank look on his face. I broke the silence. Anthony, what the hell is this? I asked, stuttering again. Well, Josh, that's something important to me that I don't want anyone to know about, he said. I asked, stuttering even more. Is this a person? He laughed before saying, Maybe it's someone we both knew, he said with a smile. Dude, you're scaring me. Just tell me what it is, I say in a panicked voice. He was silent for a moment before he said, Well, I might as well tell you the truth. You won't live to tell it anyways, he said as he pulled out a knife from his pocket. I backed up to the corner as he continued. When Tommy was walking home from school that day, I knew what I had to do. I did it for the both of us, Josh. You gotta understand that. I grabbed him and I knocked him out, and I brought him here. I'm surprised no one else was around to see it. But oh God, the feeling of stabbing Tommy, piercing the knife into him as he screamed. It was the best thing I've ever felt. He was now getting close to the corner to where I was, and I was unable to move or go anywhere, as I knew he would catch me. I didn't tell you something, Josh. Before we met, there was this day when my mom burnt her hand on the stove and a little bit of her skin fell off. And while my mom was in the bathroom cleaning the wound, I ate the skin. It tasted so good. Like bacon, but much, much better, he said with his grin becoming wider. When I finished killing Tommy, I got so hungry and he just looked so good. I had tried for too long to resist my urges, and as I took a bite of his finger, I knew I would never be able to stop. So I've stashed his body here, preserving it and eating it when I'm hungry. You know I can't eat normal meat, Josh. He was now a couple feet away from me, with his grip on the knife becoming tighter as he was upon me. Somehow I asked in my panicked state, Do your parents know? Of course, they've known about my urges since I ate my mother's skin. They know I need the food and that I crave it almost every day. He was right in front of me now. I was shaking as he pressed the knife against my throat. Why? Why did you have to come down here, bro? I didn't want to have to kill you, he said. I won't tell, Anthony, please, I won't tell, I begged. He chuckled, then said, As much as I would like to believe that, we both know you won't. He said as the knife pressed closer and closer against me. I can't have you ruining my scholarships now, can I? Don't worry, Josh, we'll still be together forever. I'm sure you'll taste really nice, he said, licking his tongue. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't fight him because he was much stronger than me, so I did the only thing I could think of. I swung my phone at him as hard as I could and I connected near his mouth. He fell back and screamed in pain as I saw blood coming out from his mouth. I took the opportunity I had and I ran towards the basement stairs. Before I got there, Anthony grabbed my leg and tried to drag me down there with him. But in one quick motion, I turned around and I kicked him as hard as I could in the nose and I ran. I ran up the stairs as fast as I could and out of the door and out of the house, never looking back. I ran all the way home and I slammed the door once I got inside. I heard my mom's voice from behind me before I even turned around. Young man, where have you been? I've been trying to call you and you never answered. I was just about to call the police before you came. I broke down and started crying, and my mom, noticing this, came and hugged me as I sobbed and I told her what happened. After I told my mom everything, she asked if I called the police. I told her no and that I didn't have time yet. My mom called the police and told them what happened. Shortly after, we heard a knock at the door and so I saw 2 cops outside. The first cop was a male with a short goatee and brown hair, and the second one was a female with short blonde hair. They told us they arrested Anthony after they found him in the basement, still laying on the ground knocked out. They found the container and found everything my mom told the cops I had found. They said they would determine who it was the next day. I think we all knew who it was already. Anthony's parents were also arrested as well, since my mom told them their involvement in the murder. The cops said they didn't even put up a fight. After the cops gave us some other details, such as the trial date and charges, they left. I went to bed right after, hoping to forget about the nightmare I just experienced. The DNA test came in the next day, and the body was confirmed to be Tommy. Everyone was talking about what happened at school, and people were pointing their fingers at me and whispering as I walked down the hall. Vanessa came running to me as I was heading to my first class and gave me a tight hug. I could see she had tears in her eyes. "Are you okay? I thought something had happened to you last night, and you never answered any of my texts or calls." I didn't say anything. I was too tired from the night before to talk or argue. The rest of the day was how I would expect it. Everyone was talking about Anthony and asking me if I was okay. A week later, Anthony's trial was set. They asked me to come in as a witness, but I declined. I didn't want to see that monster ever again. Even without me as a witness, Anthony pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Anthony's parents pleaded guilty to the involvement in this murder, and they were also sentenced to 30 years in prison. After I graduated high school, I left my town and I went to college at the University of Washington. Vanessa came to college with me, and together we bought an apartment. Shortly after, we decided to get married. In college, me and Vanessa majored in journalism. After graduating, we got jobs working for Washington Post as reporters, where we still continued writing stories, and eventually we published a book on the short stories she made. 10 years later, and I was the editor for the Washington Post, and Vanessa was the executive editor. We also have 2 kids now, Charlie and Richard. Charlie is a lot like me, and Vanessa, smart, intelligent, and very quiet. Richard was smart too, but he loved to talk and he was a very social kid. He wants to play football and other sports, while Charlie just likes to draw and read. Life is good for us. We live in a good neighborhood and we have good jobs and a great house. As I was heading out the door drinking my coffee one day, I caught something on the news. Breaking news, as killer and cannibal Anthony Johnson has escaped from prison. Police say Johnson escaped from breaking a vent in his cell, and he was using the sewer system as an escape route. Police say it also took Johnson a long time to plan and execute based on the dents and bruises on the vent. The killer is notorious for his murder of Tommy, and then I turned the TV off quickly. The memories all came back to me. I started to sweat as Vanessa came downstairs. "Josh, are you okay?" she asked. I couldn't move, talk, or think. The monster who caused me years of restless nights. The monster who I once considered my best friend. The man who tried to kill me has escaped prison. Suddenly I felt a vibration from my phone. I opened it and I saw an unknown number calling. I answered in a shaky voice. Hello. A voice came on the other end. One I had prayed I would never hear for the rest of my life. "Hey Josh, it's been a while." The man approached me and my kids in a deserted mall parking lot at 10 o'clock at night and started talking to my kids. So this happened about 5 years ago while I was 9 months pregnant. I was Christmas shopping at the mall with my 7 and 15-year-old daughters one Saturday night in a very safe city with a very low crime rate. And the mall stores were starting to close, so I took my kids to the connected Applebee's for a late dinner. We finished up eating at about 10 p.m., and we left out the Applebee's entrance into the practically deserted parking lot with our shopping bags. As we got to the car, I was in the middle of maneuvering the shopping bags on my arms to find my keys, when a 50-ish-year-old crusty-looking guy started walking up from somewhere in the parking lot with shaggy gray-white hair and a faded flannel shirt and old jeans. I noticed him briskly approaching, and when he was about 40 feet away, he said, "This is a stick-up. Give me all your money." My blood ran cold, and I stared at him owlishly and shakingly said, What? He then said he was just kidding, and he came up and stood right next to my daughters, who were standing on the other side of the car, waiting for me to unlock the car to let them in. He then starts making small talk with me and my girls. He's asking things like if they were being good girls for Santa, how old they were, and if we got all of our Christmas shopping done, what kind of things we got, and etc. He didn't seem drunk, high, slow, or even mentally challenged. He was very coherent, and he seemed of sound mind. Mind you, I was a heavily pregnant woman alone with my 2 daughters in a mostly deserted parking lot at 10 o'clock at night, who was being approached by a stranger who came and stood right next to my kids on the other side of the car, just shooting the breeze, talking to me and my kids with his hands in his pockets and occasionally looking over his shoulder. I didn't want to aggravate him, so I was politely conversing with him, and I was trying to look calm and nonchalant, while trying to disguise my frantic hands digging inside my giant purse for my car keys. This exchange went on for a couple of minutes, while he periodically kept looking over his shoulder. I was silently panicking and trying to politely keep the situation from escalating by calmly and nonchalantly talking to him, while also trying in vain to find my damn car keys to get us out of there. We're in there hiding pretty good. I felt that at any moment he was going to pull a knife or a gun, or rob me, and my kids were right next to him, away from their mother on the other side of the car. I couldn't find my fucking car keys to get my kids into the safety of the car. He kept trying to engage him in conversation, and I could see that my oldest daughter was a little weirded out. But she kept glancing at me to gauge my assessment/reaction to the situation. Kids often tend to not recognize potential danger when they are with their parents, since they see us as their protectors. And being that he was only talking and acting friendly, and I was doing my best to stay calm, they were sort of oblivious to the alarming situation we were all in. And being 9 months pregnant, I was no match for this full-grown man, especially if he was hiding a weapon on him. While still desperately digging for my keys, I tried to politely give him hints that the conversation was over by saying things like, "It was nice chatting with you, but I gotta get these kids to bed. And it was nice meeting you," and telling my girls to say that it was nice to meet him too. My polite attempts to get this guy to leave wasn't working, because he kept sidestepping my attempts, and he would ask my daughters what their favorite school subjects are, how nice young ladies they were, etc., while I was still struggling with the shopping bags and digging in my giant cluttered purse for my car keys still. My outgoing 7-year-old was completely oblivious to not how okay this situation was, because he was being friendly and because of the whole "I'm with mommy so I'm safe" child mentality. So she started to talk about what she picked out for daddy for Christmas, and started enthusiastically talking about kid stuff, and asking him if he knew what Minecraft was, etc., and keeping this creep from leaving us alone by keeping him engaged in the conversation. They didn't realize that I was becoming desperate to get them the hell out of there. Then I suddenly felt this sinking feeling of dread when I realized that I may have lost my keys in the mall, and that we were stuck outside of this strange man who kept looking over his shoulders and was showing no signs of walking away. And I was thinking that he was waiting for the perfect moment to pounce. All he had to do was grab one of my girls and threaten their life, knowing he would make me do whatever he wanted as long as he wouldn't hurt them. I started to feel my adrenaline start to spike, and my heart and stomach started doing flip-flops. I felt like at any moment shit was going to go down. It's the gravity of realizing that there were no other people or witnesses around, and that we were totally alone with him. And at that moment, the odds were stacked against us, and he has his chance. Then, all of a sudden, he was all like, "Okay, it was nice talking with you. See you later." And he walked off in the same direction as to which he came. It wasn't until then I found my car keys, and I unlocked the car, and I told my kids to get in fast, and I got in too. Then I locked the doors, and I started the car and drove the hell out of there. My 15-year-old lightheartedly and jokingly said, "Okay, that was weird," and laughed. I was overwhelmed with relief, and then I was confused over what just happened. I thought to myself, why the hell would a guy of seemingly sound mind think it's totally acceptable to go out of his way to just approach a woman and her kids in a deserted parking lot late at night just to chit-chat? But being that nothing bad happened, I brushed it off and I joked about it too. When we got home, my husband greeted us and asked us how shopping went, and I said it went well. And my 15-year-old told him about what happened in the parking lot and how weird it was, and we were kind of joking about it. I started joking too, saying how I was mentally having a panic attack while trying to look calm, and I started making fun of myself by telling my husband how I was attempting to rummage through my purse to find my car keys. My husband went completely white and I acknowledged his horrified look of alarm, and I assured him that, albeit creepy, the guy was just talking and eventually left on his own. Now, my father-in-law is a retired sheriff deputy, and my husband went through the police academy training after graduating high school. He decided to go to business school instead of becoming a cop. And being that the knowledge he gained from that, plus growing up with a cop for a dad, found out why my husband looked absolutely horrified when I told him the details. What my husband told me completely rattled me to the bone. My husband told me that he was 100% sure that the reason why that guy was hanging around and just chit-chatting was because he was waiting for me to unlock my car. And the reason why he was standing next to our kids was because once I unlocked the car and the kids started to get inside, he was most likely going to force himself into the car with the kids and hold a knife or a gun to gain leverage on me to force me to cooperate, knowing that I wouldn't abandon my kids, which would force me to get into the car with them and do whatever he wanted me to do, which would most likely be drive to a remote location to do God knows what. And being that he wasn't wearing a mask, suggests that his intentions were to also leave no witnesses to identify him. I then remembered that he was positioned by the backseat passenger door where my 7-year-old was standing by, waiting to get in. My husband then told me that most likely the reason why the guy ended up leaving was because it took so long for me to find my keys, and the longer it took, the more anxious and spooked it made him. In that whole time, I was desperate to find my car keys, which through some sort of divine intervention, stayed hidden in my purse, thus saving us from potentially being abducted. So last night, I was at a classmate's house working on a group project that we had due tomorrow. I live in an apartment in the town where our university is located, and my classmate lives at his parents' house, which is in the foothills just out of town. In order to get to the house, you have to drive along a relatively secluded and narrow 2-lane road for about 5 to 6 miles. We started working on the project at about 6 p.m. and then ended up hanging around for a while after we had finished our work. So I left his house pretty late at around 11, and I started down the road back towards town. I didn't realize how tough it would be to navigate the road at night. There were no street lights and the road was unkempt and riddled with potholes. On top of this, I had no cell service, so I had to drive very slowly to make sure I didn't blow out one of my tires, since I had used my spare a couple weeks back. I figured I was about 3 miles from the house, when I rounded a tight corner and I saw a pickup truck, the camper shell, parked diagonally across the road. The manner in which it was parked completely impeded my path, and I couldn't drive around it because there was a gully on both sides of the road. The only way for me to go at this point was backward, where there was a pull-off that I could use to turn my car around. At first I couldn't see inside the cab, but when I turned on my high beams, I saw that there was a man slouched over in the driver's seat. His head was resting against the steering wheel, as if he had been knocked out after a bad accident. I immediately sensed something was wrong. The way his car had just coincidentally come to rest in a position that totally blocked the road was a big red flag for me. I have actually heard stories of people playing dead on the road as a way to lure unsuspecting people out of their cars so they could rob them. I decided, fuck this shit, and I elected to go back to my classmate's house and explain what was going on. I threw the car into reverse, and I kept my eyes darting back and forth between my rear view and the truck. I looked and saw that I was almost to the pull-off where I could turn around. When I looked back, my heart skipped about 5 beats. The man who had been slouched over in the driver's seat was now walking towards my car at a hurried pace, while a few other men jumped out of the camper shell and started moving towards me as well. I panicked and I accelerated backwards into the pull-off, which messed up the undercarriage of my car pretty bad. As I put it into drive, the guys were already at my passenger side door, tugging on the handle, which thank the Lord was locked. I only caught a brief glimpse of him, but his face appeared to be scabbed and leathery. Definitely a meth head or some sort of drug abuser. I sped away, and I didn't slow down at all until I reached the house, constantly checking my rear view to see if they were following. Thankfully, they didn't tail me. When I reached the house, I explained what had happened to my classmate, and we called the cops. I was grateful that my buddy's parents were kind enough to let me stay the night. They didn't find anyone on the road matching the description, but I filed an incident report, and they told me they would be on the lookout for similar vehicles and suspicious activity. But holy shit, I'm still so shook up over it. I keep getting the same adrenaline rush I got when I saw the guy charging me whenever I think about it. One time, I went to the bar with one of my friends. I had just turned 21, so I haven't been to much bars up to that point. My friend was drinking on the way to the bar, so he was already pretty drunk when we got there. When I sat at the bar, a cute girl came and talked to me and my friend. She said her name was Candace, and I noticed she had really bright red hair. I assumed she dyed it. It was pretty, but unnatural. Anyways, this girl was flirting with me and my friend. She could tell my friend was already very drunk, so to be honest, I played along like I was drunk already too, since it seemed to be working for my friend. I didn't know if she was just trying to get free drinks, so I told her we didn't have much money. She offered to buy us drinks, and she kept buying us drinks, and I started to get confused as to who she liked between me and my friend. My friend went to the bathroom. Before he came back, he was kicked out by the bouncers. He was just too drunk. Candace and I went outside with him, and she kept telling him to go home with her. He was so out of it that he could barely answer her. I told her that he was too drunk and that I couldn't let him go anywhere. I didn't want him to wake up hungover in some random house with no car and no idea what happened. Candace kept pushing it, saying that she would take care of him, but I told her no because I had to stay with him. I was more sober than him, and he was my responsibility right now. I told her the only way he was going anywhere was if I tagged along. I assumed she thought that I was jealous or cock-blocking, but my friend could barely stand, and he lost interest in Candace already at that point. She immediately started flirting with me and offered to get my friend a taxi to drive him home, and said we could go to her place alone. At this point I had a few drinks and I was feeling pretty good, so I agreed. We took my friend to the taxi and walked to her car. I slightly stumbled on the way to the car. "Wow, you're pretty drunk, huh?" she said, smiling as she held onto my arm. "Yeah," I said. I don't know why, but I just felt slightly shy and anxious. Everything was just happening too easy. It just felt weird. Despite this, we got into her car and we drove off down the street. "Hey, do you want to stop at the liquor store and get some more to drink? I'll buy it, so don't worry about paying," she offered. I didn't want to drink any more than I already did. I was already pretty buzzed, and I wanted to be able to carry myself throughout the rest of the night. Sometimes I make myself look stupid when I'm drunk, so I didn't want to ruin anything with Candace more than I already did earlier by telling her that my friend was too drunk. I told her I was already drunk enough, but she insisted. I really didn't want to seem lame, so I told her to give me a pint of liquor with some apple juice to chase it. She went in the store and she came out with a lot more than just a pint. I assumed she wanted to drink more also, and that's why she got a fifth instead. On the car ride, we passed the bottle back and forth, but she took tiny sips. I tried to take tiny sips too, but she kept passing me the bottle and telling me to drink. Somehow managed to drink all of my apple juice, and I pretended to drink the bottle by spitting the liquor in the apple juice bottle. I tossed the apple juice bottle full of liquor out the window before she saw it. I didn't want her to know I was acting drunker than I was, and she actually believed I was sloppy drunk when I was only simply buzzed. I took a couple more sips of liquor and I finished the bottle. Throughout the car ride, I called her the wrong name a couple of times to get a reaction out of her. She didn't react to it though. She just kept letting me call her Carla without correcting me. For some reason I thought she lied to me about her name initially. We drove up to her house and I pretended to trip and I stumbled into her front door. She helped me walk inside by holding me up, and she opened her front door, which was unlocked, and we walked into her house, but then she closed the front door and locked it. thought that was strange, but I assumed she didn't want anyone walking in on us. I told her that I just had to use the bathroom real quick, and I walked into her bathroom, locked the door, and looked into the mirror. I just felt strange. I felt like something was off. Thought myself becoming more drunk from finishing the bottle earlier. I turned on the sink to make noise, and I made myself puke up the liquor I drank. I flushed it, and I went to the sink, and I started drinking the tap water out of my hands to sober up. I just didn't want to be drunk, but I still wanted to hook up with Candace, so I wanted to pretend to be drunk. I turned the sink off, and I could hear her talking to someone. He's drunk as hell. He can barely stand up. How about you just do it? Who the hell was she talking to? And do what? I walked out of the bathroom and into the living room. The moment I stepped into the living room, I saw her walking into another room. All I could see was the back of her head. That strange, very bright red hair go into another room. I didn't see her face or anything. I just saw her kind of walk fast into the room. The living room was pretty dark. Hey, where you going? I slurred like I was drunk. She walked back into the dark living room and up to me. Let's go out of my room, she said. I looked at her bright red hair and then into her eyes. They were different. Her face was different. It was another girl with the same hair. It was a wig the whole time. She had changed it with the girl from earlier for whatever reason. My heart felt like it stopped, but I tried to look like I had no idea it was a different girl. I kind of smiled at her, and I told her I just needed to use the bathroom one more time, and I told her sorry and that I was just really drunk. She said it's fine, just hurry up in there. I went to the bathroom one last time and I locked the door. I heard her whisper something to someone again this time. I think I heard a male voice whisper back. I honestly didn't concentrate on listening to exactly what was said. Something sketchy was going on and I had to get out of that house, so I didn't care. I opened the bathroom window and I jumped straight out of it, and I ran faster than I ever have in my life. I didn't look behind myself or anything. I just ran through the backyard, jumped the fence, and I ran through someone else's backyard. I hit a back road, and then I ran toward the main road. I just kept running down the main road until I saw a 24-hour convenience store. I ran into this store, and I stood at the front where I was in clear view of a camera. I called a taxi and then went home. I tried to think about what happened that night. What was she or they planning on? Why did she tell me a fake name? And why was she trying to get my friend and I so drunk? I thought maybe it was a robbery, but she kept spending money on us. She kept buying us drinks, and she even paid for my friend's taxi cab. And mostly, why did she wear a wig that she gave to another girl to wear? Who was she talking to? What did it mean? And what was in that room that they tried to lure me into?